Ever wondered if you could peek into the future of macOS without risking your solopreneur business? Well, today's your lucky day. In this episode, we're diving into the world of macOS beta testing, and I will show you how to satisfy your tech curiosity while keeping your business data safe. And stick around till the end because I have a special tip for those of you juggling multiple Apple devices. Let's get started. Beta testing macOS before its official release can be tempting, especially with all the new features that Apple teases us with. However, doing so without proper precautions can negatively impact the security and functionality of your solopreneur business. So how can you safely test it out? In this episode, we'll explore the motivations behind beta testing macOS, then understand the security risks that you might expose yourself to, and discuss the safest methods to test them without compromising your business. Stick around till the end as I will discuss how to safely beta test iOS and iPadOS too. So let's start with the main motivation for beta testing the upcoming version of macOS. The first one is that you might be curious about the features that will be introduced next fall. At the time of recording, so July 2024, the next version will be macOS 15 Sequoia that will finally introduce window management features that have been available on Microsoft Windows PCs for decades. I'm talking specifically about dragging an application window to either edge of the screen to automatically resize it. So, dragging an app window to the right edge of the screen will resize that window so that it fills the right half of the screen. Same thing on the left, top and bottom edge. If your screen is big enough, you can even drag the app window to either corner to fill a quarter of the screen. On top of that, there are keyboard shortcuts to achieve the same result. Now, you can already get a similar feature with macOS Sonoma or earlier versions using third-party tools like Raycast, which is free, Better Snap Tool, about €3 on the Mac App Store, or Moon, €10 on the Mac App Store. The second motivation would be to test if your business-critical applications will run properly on the upcoming version of macOS. It's important to realize that not all app developers make their app compatible right away. In other words, if this is your main motivation, then it is best to wait for the last month or so of the beta testing phase, meaning between mid-August and mid-September. The third motivation would be to test business-critical peripherals like your printer, a legacy scanner, or anything else that you rely upon to run your solopreneur business. Same thing as with applications, not all manufacturers make their device drivers and companion apps compatible right away. So in this case, wait also until mid-August before beta testing the next version of macOS. The fourth and final reason would be to test business-critical online services, either as a user or as a web developer. Here, if you absolutely need to use a third-party browser like Chrome, Edge or Firefox, you will want to test if those run properly in the next version of macOS. Now, if you primarily use Safari, you actually don't need to beta test macOS because Apple provides two ways to test the next version of Safari. If your Mac is running the latest official version of macOS, then the safest is to install Safari Technology Preview, which can run alongside the current version of Safari. Now, if your Mac is still one version of macOS behind the latest one, then the only way is by installing the beta version of Safari. However, it is very risky because it overwrites the current version of Safari, and the only way to go back is by reinstalling macOS, so only do that if you are a web developer and you have a secondary device. Next up, let's discuss about the potential security risks associated with beta testing macOS. The first risk would be that your device got bricked. In case you haven't heard this term before, it means that because of serious bugs in macOS, your device would be completely unusable. It doesn't boot anymore, and usually the only way to get it working again is to completely wipe it, and sometimes it even requires a trip to an Apple store or an authorized Apple service provider. The second risk would be data loss, either locally on your Mac or data synchronized with iCloud or other cloud storage providers. This could also impact data stored inside applications like Notes, Mail, or Calendar. The third and last risk would be that your device got compromised by malware. Beta versions of software and operating systems are naturally full of bugs and vulnerabilities, making them prime target for bad actors. This is why it's important to know about the safest methods to beta test macOS, and let's start by briefly talking about the two different beta versions that are available. The first one is called the Developer Beta. It is available right after the WWDC keynote, so the Worldwide Developer Conference, and for anyone registered via developer.apple.com. It used to be a paid program, now it's totally free. The main purpose is for developers to test their app with the next version of macOS. Additionally, they can start incorporating new functionalities into their applications. Now, unless you are a developer, you should avoid this version and wait for the other one, the public beta version. Historically, it has been made available by mid-July, roughly 1 month after the WWDC keynote. It's the same code as the latest developer beta, but usually released a few days later. So in 2024, the macOS 15 Sequoia Developer Beta 3 was released on July 10, and 5 days later, on July 15th, the macOS 15 Sequoia Public Beta 1 was released. Now, it requires signing up first via beta.apple.com. And then you would need to agree to the Apple Beta Software Program Agreement. It's a confidentiality agreement that you sign, and you agree that you will only post screenshots and talk about features that have already been publicly disclosed by Apple. And I strongly suggest that you sign up for that program using a secondary Apple account rather than your main one. So when it comes to methods for beta testing macOS, here are 4 of them sorted from safest to riskiest. First, using a secondary device not linked to your Solopreneur business. Second, inside a virtual machine. Third, from an external SSD. And fourth, from another partition of the internal drive. So let's begin with using a secondary device totally independent from your business. This is what every solopreneur should shoot for, period. The big advantages is that there are no risks regarding the main Mac and the iCloud data. And it's also the easiest to do for most Mac users. On top of that, you don't need to worry about storage space on your main Mac. The big disadvantages is that first, obviously, it requires a compatible Mac. I will put a list and a link in the show notes for the list with macOS Sequoia. And if you want to test applications that require a license, make sure that you are able to easily use the same license after installing the app on another device. And actually, this is where I feel it's my duty to talk about Setapp. In case you don't know, Setapp, it's a subscription service that gives access to a catalog of more than 240 Mac applications, as well as iPhone and iPad companion apps. The base plan covers 1 Mac, the intermediate plan covers 1 Mac and 4 iOS devices, and the plan that I have, called Power User, covers 4 Macs and 4 iOS devices. This means that with my plan, I can easily test all the Setapp applications while beta testing macOS. No need to buy additional licenses or try to find back all the different license keys. Normally, you can only try Setapp for free for 7 days, but if you use the promo code Macpreneur at sign up, The free trial period is extended to 30 days. To get this special bonus at no cost to you, just visit macpreneur.com/setapp, SETAPP in one word. And you will see that the promo code Macpreneur will be pre-filled for you. Just click on the Continue button, then create a Setapp account, either using your Apple ID, your Google account, or submitting your name, email address, and the password of your choice. Once again, visit macpreneur.com/setapp to start streamlining how you manage your software licenses today. Okay, now let's talk about the process that I recommend following when beta testing macOS on a spare Mac. If possible, start from a fresh install of the previous version of macOS, or at the minimum, install all the latest security updates. Then you would configure a secondary iCloud account and all the necessary apps that you want to test. Then you will make a time machine backup and a clone, if possible, of the machine at that state. Afterwards, there are two options to actually install the beta version of macOS. If your Mac is already running macOS Ventura 13.4 or later, you just visit System Settings, then Software Updates, and you will see an option for beta updates. You just say yes, and then it will allow you to install the latest beta version. If you have an earlier version of macOS, you will need to visit beta.apple.com and then install the macOS Public Beta Access Utility. It's an application that will tweak system preferences. So you will go back afterwards into System Preferences, Software Updates, and you will see then that you will have access to the public beta version of macOS. Second method, inside a virtual machine. The big advantage is that it can be run from your main Mac without risk of losing business critical data or even breaking the Mac. And on top of that, it's possible to test multiple beta versions simultaneously. The disadvantage is that it requires a developer account, it requires installing the beta version of Xcode, which takes about 4 gigs of space. It also requires sharing the built-in RAM between the host and the guest. So it means that if you have less than 16 gigs of RAM on your Mac, it's going to be very tough. It's also at the moment not possible to log into iCloud or the App Store from inside the virtual machine. Actually, Apple is changing that, but the host needs to be already on Sequoia. And then you need to be able to allocate at least 64 gigabytes of storage space, preferably 128 gigs or more, just for the virtual machine internal drive. And so that could be done locally or on an external SSD. And also, it is not as straightforward as installing it directly on the device. In short, it's okay for developers and Mac users who are already familiar with virtual machines. And if that's your case, just Google the procedure for the chosen virtual machine software that you want. Third method, by installing it on an external SSD. The big advantage is that obviously it doesn't take any storage space on the internal hard drive. It is suitable even for Macs that only have 8 gigs of RAM. It doesn't require a developer account, and it's also possible to sign into iCloud and the Mac App Store within the beta version. On top of that, it can be run from the main Mac without the risk of needing to reformat the internal hard drive. The disadvantages are that it requires purchasing an external SSD, I would say minimum 512 gigabytes. There is still a risk of breaking the Mac because there could be a bug with macOS or with the firmware that will be installed alongside macOS. And also, you cannot use your Mac while it's booted from the external hard drive. What I mean by that is you cannot use the main environment of your Mac. In short, I recommend to use that method with a secondary Mac that you don't want to erase. And so for the process, if needed, back up any data that you might have already on the external hard drive, then turn off the computer, plug the external hard drive in, boot from the recovery partition. I talked about that in a previous episode. I will put the link in the show notes. Then you will open disk utility, select the external hard drive. You need to erase it by choosing the right format and the right partition map and so on. Then you will exit disk utility and install the current version of macOS. If needed, you will need to enter the password of an administrator user account. Then you will select the external drive and proceed with a fresh install of the current version of macOS. And afterwards, you will reboot from the external hard drive. You will go through the setup process, including entering your secondary Apple account for iCloud in the App Store. Ideally, you want to make a backup or a clone of that external drive in that state, and then you will visit then system settings, turn on beta updates, and install the public beta, and then configure it. The fourth method, and the least safe, is from a secondary partition of the internal hard drive of a Mac. The big advantages are that you don't need to buy an external SSD. Again, it's suitable for Macs with only 8 gigs of RAM. Again, it doesn't require a developer account, and it's possible to sign into iCloud and the Mac App Store within the beta version. Now, the big disadvantages are that it requires enough internal storage space left. So if you only have 256 gigabyte internal hard drive, it may be not enough. There are also risks associated with partitioning the internal hard drive, and if anything goes wrong on the macOS beta partition, it could actually damage the entire drive, and you would need then to reformat completely the internal hard drive, meaning the partition that has the version of macOS that is the current one. On top of that, there is also the risk of breaking the Mac. And same thing, you cannot use your Mac from the main partition while it is booted from the secondary partition. Again, it's okay if you try that, but from a secondary Mac, not the main one. In terms of process, it's the same as with an external SSD, except that in disk utility, instead of erasing the external hard drive, you will partition the internal one and then install macOS fresh on the second partition. In any case, never ever install a beta version of macOS directly on the internal hard drive of your main Mac. If you only have one secondary Mac that you already allocated as your backup device in case your main Mac has an issue, then depending on the amount of memory and available storage space, I would suggest to choose between the virtual machine and the external SSD method. In my case, I've combined both, as I'm currently beta testing macOS Sequoia inside a virtual machine running on an external SSD connected to my 14-inch MacBook Pro, which is my secondary and backup Mac. Before concluding this episode, there is one more thing that I'd like to mention. To fully try out some of the upcoming features of macOS, like iPhone mirroring with Sequoia, you might be tempted to beta test iOS. And if you have an iPad, you might be tempted to test iPadOS 2 because the latest one, iPadOS 18, will get a new calculator app that allows to make calculations and resolve equations and do nice graphs. In that case, you need to be even more cautious because the only way to downgrade to a previous version of iOS or iPadOS is to completely wipe the device and restore it to factory settings. And you can only restore data that has been backed up with an older version or an equivalent version of iOS and iPadOS that you had reinstalled. In other words, if you have an iOS 18 backup, it cannot be restored after downgrading to iOS 17. So you need a backup when the device was still on iOS 17. And then mobile devices running a beta version of iOS or iPadOS tend to run noticeably slower and hotter. And finally, the battery drains much faster because beta versions of iOS and iPadOS are not fully optimized yet, and there are background telemetry and logging tasks running constantly. This is why it's very important to use only a secondary, non-business critical mobile device and to configure it with a secondary iCloud account, the same as you would use to beta test macOS, for instance. And also, before installing the beta version of iOS or iPadOS, you absolutely need to make a local backup of the device onto your Mac. And then, even more important, archive the local backup so that it cannot be overwritten. That way, you will be able to restore that backup if you ever need to downgrade from the beta version to the latest official version. So to recap, beta testing macOS can be a great way to prepare for the new features and ensure compatibility with your essential apps and peripherals. Remember to choose the safest method that suits your need, whether it's using a secondary Mac, a virtual machine, an external SSD, or a secondary partition. And follow my recommendations if you are tempted to beta test the upcoming version of iOS and iPadOS 2. In any case, prefer the public beta version unless you are already a developer. In the comments below, please share your main takeaway from this episode, and if not done yet, please subscribe to my channel so you will automatically get more helpful tips on how to run your business on your Mac. Today's episode concludes Season 5 that was dedicated to the digital security aspect of your solopreneur business. If you're interested in this topic and you discovered the Macpreneur podcast only recently, I recommend visiting macpreneur.com/season and the number 5, where you will find all the episodes about digital security. Since I take a few weeks of vacation beginning of August, there will be a break in the regular programming. It doesn't mean that the podcast feed will be empty, as I will rebroadcast the most popular and evergreen episodes from Season 1. And given that it's the summer holidays, the next episode will give you tips and tricks when traveling with Apple gear. For Season 6 that will start in September, I have decided to switch back to an interview format, with one episode already recorded and a few more in the preparation stage. In fact, if you'd like to be a guest, just visit macpreneur.com/apply, fill the application form, and I will get back to you within a few days. I'd love to chat with you about how you run your solopreneur business on your Mac and what tips, tools, and strategies you have put in place to be more efficient. Once again, visit macpreneur.com/apply. I can't wait to feature you in an upcoming episode of the Macpreneur podcast. And until next time, I'm Damien Schreurs, wishing you a great day.
Thank you for watching the Macpreneur podcast. If you've enjoyed the show, please leave a comment and share it with a friend right now.